This is Swapnil Bhartiya with Rob Hirschfeld. This is our limited series on scaling infrastructure as code. And in this episode, we're going to talk about observability. Observability, as you know, is one of the hottest topic today. But it really depends who you're talking to and how they look at it. It's sometimes not seen essentially from the perspective of automation. So when you talk about observability, what do you mean?
This has been one of our real lessons about building automation. So the thing that really made the observability phenomena happen is that we kept running things in containers that would go away. We'd been using logging and monitoring for a long time, but what was happening with observability is that we'd run something in a container, the container would end, and then it would go away. We see the exact same phenomena in automation. And it's been incredibly frustrating to troubleshoot and manage automation for a really productive system for as long as I've been working in data center infrastructure. And when we think about observability in a automation system, what we're really talking about is being able to really track what's going on a job by job basis. Track the system, see what results it produces, watch the system as it runs, and then collect information live from that system as it goes. So an operator can actually make real-time adjustments to a living system and also get good logs back to see exactly what's happening and what's causing systems to interact. That type of transparency in automation is groundbreaking. And it really changes the way you interact with systems because all of a sudden you have much more real-time information about how the system is built. So if you want to run infrastructure as code at scale, then you really have to come back and figure out how you are able to see what's happening in the system as it's getting built and make sure that everybody who's participating in operating that system can see the same information, right? These are the hearts of what has made the observability such an important topic across the board in infrastructure.
Can you also give some examples of how observability is helping operators, especially with infrastructure as code?
Yeah, this is really a big deal. So when we're running a workflow end to end on building a system, every single job that gets set includes a live log of how the system's operating. So as we're building, say we're doing a cloud deployment, in a cloud deployment, we actually have multiple layers of interactions. And so it's a good way to think about observability. So at the top level, we actually have a cluster build process. And in that cluster build process, you can watch things like SSH keys getting created. You understand exactly how they're created and where they're getting stored. You also then come back and when you get into, say, the Terraform application for building that cluster behind the scenes, you can watch the Terraform system being applied. You can see all the prerequisite steps that go into generating that, see the exact logs of what was getting done, how it was run. You can set debug parameters, actually keep the plan that was applied. But even once that's done, when the machines are created, you see exactly what they were created with. As they start to come online and join the infrastructure, you get to watch their inventory, their SSH keys, right? Every single step of the system is exposed. And you might think, Rob, that's not infrastructure as code. But yet it is, because every single thing that's happening in that system is the infrastructure as code. You're running the automation. The fact that you can watch exactly what was executed as part of that is critical to building good code. Without the observability, the logging, and the data and the traceability that you have, you actually can't maintain and troubleshoot the automation.
Let's talk about traceability. Is traceability with automation different than without automation?
It's different in that you need to be able to instrument, when you're building development tools, you need to be able to instrument systems. But at the same time, in a lot of ways, I actually think the overlaps in a good system are higher than they are ever before. When we build automation, we actually have planned places where we can pull back logging, we can pull back events, we can track data. And so in that sense, it's very similar. You can take advantage of an underlying platform to collect information that you use to monitor the status, performance, infrastructure, health. All those pieces actually get woven into this. And it is very much a matter of how you build the automation. If you build it to be observable, then you can have a much more observable system. And from that perspective, they're very similar.
When we look at observability, what we kind of think of it is creating more visibility for operators. But then what about monitoring and logging? That also does the same thing. So can you talk about the difference there?
This is a very similar conversation we have in developer observability conversations also, because doing observability doesn't eliminate the need to do monitoring or logging. Monitoring is really much more about collecting time series performance data and health checks and things like that, more external to the system, and is still critically important. Same thing with logging. Logging is, core to being able to troubleshoot and diagnose a system. What we're really talking about that's different here is our ability to understand, tune, and fix a system as it's progressing. And that type of actual engagement is a really important part of thinking about the observability of the system. The other thing I'd stress here that's really important is the collaborative aspect. Part of what we want to do here is not just be able to just stuff things into a historical log for when there's a problem. What we want to be able to do is come back and figure out how people can help each other. So if you're looking at observability from a development and operations perspective and SRE perspective, what you're trying to do is have teams that are able to work together and add in observability so that you can improve the system. And automation and infrastructure as code observability is exactly the same thing. It's not about how you work for yourself. It's actually about how you empower the people who you're collaborating with, whether immediately or down the road when you don't even get to know them. That's one of the things for RackN. We spend a lot of time on observability for our customers who are using the product in the future, even before there's a need at the moment.
Given the current situation where cybersecurity is kind of becoming a very serious challenge, can all this logging expose sensitive information as well?
Definitely one of the challenges with any system where you're collecting operational data is being very sensitive to what type of sensitive, right, secrets, configuration files, data. We spend a lot of time thinking about how that information is retained as it's being generated. And what we see is that there are definite needs to review systems to make sure that they're not emitting sensitive information as part of their sort of logged operations. And at the same time, you have to be aware that there are times when you do need to expose sensitive information to troubleshoot. What we typically do is two things for this. One is there's a lot of information in Digital Rebar that is dynamically generated. And dynamically generated systems information can have, like a Terraform plan, can have sensitive information in it. That's pretty normal. But we don't store those. It's one of the things about thinking about infrastructure as code is about how you build and compose infrastructure. So you always want to think about how you inject and don't store sensitive information, critical component for that. And then you also want to go back through and look to see if you're accidentally logging something that could be sensitive and make sure that you don't emit that type of information in the logs when you can avoid it. This is really about discipline and being careful in systems, and then also making sure that you're not leaking it when you go. It's funny. We have a sort of a pattern of making anything that turns on sensitive information one default off, but also be read and scary and tell you in very clear terms that hey, turning this switch to yes, a debug flag. It's going to be clearly labeled so that you're doing it. But that's an important thing to keep in mind.
And as much as it's about discipline, it also could be an issue of compliance. How does Infrastrous as code handle that?
Wow, compliance is a really important issue for people. And so when you think about observability and compliance, infrastructure as code is a mixed thing. One of the pieces that's really important is knowing that you are producing the right information for compliance. And this is, I think, where infrastructure as code is a real win from a compliance perspective, because it's a question of, can your systems be subverted, bypassed? Are somebody going to miss collecting information that's absolutely required? And that's where infrastructure as code is really, really strong. Part of what we've been able to do with infrastructure pipelines is ensure that there is data collected throughout the pipeline. And that helps with observability, it helps with logging, it helps with checking and management. But critically, it helps with compliance because you can ensure that in every segment, every operation that you have, standard compliance data is checked and gathered. And that really does end up as a breakthrough in how you can be very confident that the systems that you're deploying and operating are performing, not just the way you expect them to, but within tolerance, making sure that security policies are in place, that the information that you think is there, the systems that you think you're using are the ones you're using. Those are critical components for operating any system and actually tie back into this observability system. And that's very important. It's also worth noting here that part of compliance is validation, and is part of doing infrastructure as code. You can actually take observability data and include compliance checks in the same steps or in the adjacent steps. And that's also incredibly powerful, so that you're not just collecting and observing data and operational your systems, you're actually verifying that they are what you expect them to be and ensuring compliance all along that process. So these are really connected concepts.
What kind of impact it has on day two operations?
Day two operations is always critical here. I feel like observability is fundamentally a day two statement, because what we're really talking about doing here is helping operators run systems on an ongoing basis. And so the more observability you have, the better you can maintain those systems, right? You can help make sure that they're working, right? We just talked about compliance, but you can also figure out what went wrong when things change. People really forget that observability isn't just about checking the code that you've written and making sure that it works. It's actually about dealing with long-term resilience of how the systems operate. So a big part of building strong observability into your infrastructure as code is being able to ride through changes that come into your infrastructure without you even realizing that it happened. When the servers that you're shipped have a change in device driver or device or configuration, when the cloud you're using patches or updates the operating systems that they're delivering in unexpected ways, or changes a network attachment that you were counting on. Those are critical day two components. And so the better you can do finding, identifying, and seeing that when it happens, the more resilient your overall systems are going to be. So observability is a critical thing to be working on day two, even if you don't realize it as you're writing the observability components.